Hashimoto's, interestingly, is a good example of how we don't just try and treat the thyroid, which is the medical model of just fix the thyroid hormones, which for some people is invaluable initially, and sometimes you've got to do that. Some people can be so bad that you have to start with that. But at the same time, then you want to look at how you're going to go about improving their whole health. So nutrient-wise, herbal medicine makes a massive difference, and getting the diet right is a really big part of starting to repair the gut and start to turn down those antibody levels as well.
We are back into it, health and wellbeing with Peter Mullen. Peter, we're going straight to the telephone with Brett. You've got some underactive thyroid concerns for Peter today.
Yeah. Recently, they've increased my thyroxine from 50 to 75 micrograms, but it's not helping. I'm still flat as a tack. No energy. I'm only 51.
Okay.
Yeah. Help.
Look, do you know how to read your thyroid test results?
No, well, it just comes straight back to my GP. She just says we need to increase it. And she said the 75 milligrams, my levels come up, the TSH has come up to an acceptable range.
Okay.
But I don't know what that range is. She doesn't tell me. I don't ask her. She don't tell me. I don't have a blood test.
Next time you get a blood test done, it's worthwhile understanding your levels with thyroid, because you can sort of see yourself. Oftentimes, so just ask the GP for a copy, and then I'm more than happy if you want to ring the office. You can have a free chat with one of our naturopaths, and they can explain how to actually read those thyroid results. Now, if with thyroid, like oftentimes the GPs are just happy if your thyroid levels appear to be normal. And often they'll say your levels are fine, you should be feeling fine, but that's not always the case with thyroid patients. So sometimes it's because you're lacking some of the nutrients. Like often what they'll prescribe is thyroxine, which is T4. But T4 has to get converted to T3, which is the active form of thyroid hormone. So unless they're testing also the T3, you don't know really whether that T4 is doing what it's supposed to do.
When they do the thyroid, what they call STH,
yes.
At the pathology, they're only testing T4.
Yeah, well, see, then you need to test T3 because that's your active thyroid hormone. So if you're not converting T4 to T3 because you're lacking things like zinc, tyrosine, iodine, selenium, even things like low vitamin D and low iron can interfere with how well that converts. So what I would do for starters is I'd ask your GP to do two things. Test your antibodies.
Yeah.
You want to know whether this is an autoimmune thyroid condition, if it is Hashimoto's, and also to test your T3 so you can see actually whether you are getting enough of the active thyroid hormone being converted.
An antibody.
Yeah.
But I'll do it because I'm seeing her next week. But, you get so tired, you've just got to lie down. You've just got to shut your eyes. You just can't move.
Well, look, once you get those test results, if you like, you can give our office a call, and one of our naturopaths would be happy to have a free chat with you. If you tell me,
I'll tell you what we'll do for you there. If you just want to hang on the line for a moment, Brett, we'll get Peter to come back to you in just a few moments, okay?
Righto.
Okay, we'll get some details for you, and hopefully we can get Brett on the right track there, Peter.
It's a great idea. It is. It's a common thing I hear. People say, my thyroid's low. The doctor said once I start on this thyroid hormone, I'm going to feel fantastic. Mm-hmm. And unfortunately, it's not always the case. But there's always a reason why that's the case too. So it's a matter of trying to find out why you're not feeling as great as you should when you're taking thyroid hormone.
Delving a little bit deeper as we discover with Brett.
Absolutely.
Hashimoto's disease, that is what we're talking about today. Can you sort of take us through and describe what actually Hashimoto's is?
Well, the thyroid gland, a little gland sits at the base of your, just under your Adam's apple, basically, and it produces thyroid hormone. So thyroid glands traditionally can go overactive, which is not what we're talking about today, or it can go underactive. And there's lots of different reasons why you can have an underactive thyroid. One of those reasons, which is quite common, is because you've developed an autoimmune condition called Hashimoto's thyroid disease. What happens with Hashimoto's, like any other autoimmune condition, it's where your immune system all of a sudden has gotten confused and has started to attack your thyroid gland. Initially, the thyroid gland might go over-functioning, but eventually ends up under-functioning. So you've got a double whammy. You've got these elevated antibodies in your blood, and you've also got the thyroid not producing enough thyroid hormone.
So I guess that's the end result of having the disease. What actually causes it? What are some of the things that take us from being quote unquote normal to being in this situation?
No one sort of look with autoimmune conditions. So celiac disease is the only autoimmune condition where they know what causes it. You know, celiac disease is caused by, you've got to have the genetic predisposition and then the environmental trigger. Mm-hmm. So in the case of celiacs, they know that the environmental trigger, if you've got the genes, they have to have the genes for the most part, they know the environmental trigger is gluten, eating gluten. So with all the other autoimmune conditions, and there's about 80 odd known autoimmune, and it's getting crazier and crazier. Australia's actually got a bit of a bad reputation for these weird and wonderful autoimmune conditions, which no one knows why. But anyway, so with Hashimoto's, the thyroid starts to attack the thyroid gland. There's different theories as to what the triggers. Like, again, we suspect you've got to have the genetic predisposition. Environmental factors can include viruses. So the Epstein-Barr virus, the same virus that causes glandular fever.
So how do we get that?
40 to 50% of the adult population in Australia will have been in contact with the Epstein-Barr virus. Whether you know it or not.
Gotcha.
If you had a blood test, they'd probably see antibodies to the Epstein-Barr virus saying you've had it at some point.
Fair enough.
So a virus can trigger.
Is it possible too that some of the toxins and chemicals that are in our environment, they possibly could be adding to this?
Absolutely. So smokers, high concentrations of cadmium end up in the thyroid, can cause thyroid damage and may confuse the immune system. But toxins, things like maybe excess chlorine, excess fluoride, pesticides. So anything that can cause damage or change the thyroid tissue may cause your immune system to go a bit crazy. The other reason why you can develop an autoimmune condition is related always back to the gut. And we've talked about that before. Irritable bowel, leaky gut, people that have had chronic gut issues for years, because 60 to 70% of the immune system is based around the gut. If you've got gut issues, you can reach critical mass. You can have an emotional event sometimes that will trigger your body, all of a sudden your immune system switching and starting to attack your thyroid. So stress is a big factor as well.
Okay, so stress and the environment. Gee, we hear that so often, don't we, Peter?
More and more.
We really do. Hashimoto's disease, yes, it's not sushi, it is underactive thyroid. Now, Peter, some of the symptoms you think, well, maybe am I got an underactive thyroid? What are some of the things that we could be on the lookout for that may put us in this category today?
Well, the main symptoms with Hashimoto's or underactive thyroid is fatigue, which is, that's one of the most common things that people present with. It's also difficult losing weight. A lot of people, that doesn't matter what they do, they just can't lose weight. Can be symptoms of an underactive thyroid. If you feel like you're feeling the cold more, you never used to be a real cold frog, but now you're having to rug up everywhere you go. It can be things like depression or low mood, dry skin. Often people with underactive thyroid lose the outer third of their eyebrow as well.
I was wondering when looked like you had something in your eye there, but you're just pointing to the eyebrows
I was
themselves.
just showing you where they were losing their hair from there.
I know where the eyebrows are.
Also, things like brittle nails can be hormonal problems, fertility issues, and Hashimoto's. Like a lot of people get an underactive thyroid just generally as they get older, wear and tear, toxins, stress, etc. But Hashimoto's often triggered off in a lot of younger women, after they've had a baby. Mm-hmm. The stress of being pregnant and then the birth, and then often they're diagnosed with Hashimoto's. So it's often preceded or preempted by some sort of event or trauma as well, but it can interfere with fertility as well. One of the reasons why women can have trouble falling pregnant is if they've got thyroid, particularly Hashimoto's.
So if we find ourselves in any of these situations and it turns out, yes, we do have it, what are some of the natural therapies out there that can sort of put us back on the right track? Or I guess more importantly, can it be completely cured? Can we turn it around completely, or is it an ongoing thing?
Well, look, before we get there...
You always do this to me.
Yeah. Just a couple of things around thyroid. So, a lot of people have Hashimoto's. It's a really common thing, and often this is why it's so important to get your thyroid bloods done and thyroid bloods done properly. Often doctors will do a TSH, which gives you an idea of your thyroid, but it's not actually your thyroid function. You need to get your T4 and T3 levels to really know where your hormones are up to. If you're suspicious that your thyroid's going a bit underactive, you also need to get your antibodies levels tested. Now, this is an interesting thing with Hashimoto's particularly. A lot of times the Western medical approach is if you've got an underactive thyroid, they'll give you T4, which they did in Brett's case, which is thyroxine or oroxine. And then they'll test your TSH and your T4, but they don't often go further and test your T3. As I was saying to Brett, your T4 has to get converted to T3 in your liver. So you need selenium, good levels of selenium and zinc, which a lot of people are low on in Australia. So you need to know your T3 because that's going to tell you whether you're actually going to be feeling better or not. Now, if the blood test levels, say the blood test levels all come back okay, a lot of people think medically that you should be fine. If you're tired, it's nothing to do with your thyroid. But there's a growing school of thought, and we sort of tend to lead more this way as well, that if you've also got really high levels of antibodies, and antibodies are immune cells that you're producing to attack your thyroid, if you've got high levels of antibodies, it's being suspected that those antibodies may also cause symptoms of fatigue and may interfere with your thyroid hormone working. Often doctors will say, you don't need to worry about your antibodies. There's nothing that can be done about elevated antibodies. As long as those blood levels are fine, you should be fine. But more and more I'm finding that people aren't feeling fine and that their elevated antibody levels have to be reduced. So when we look at natural therapy treatments for helping people with Hashimoto's, it's all initially the obvious thyroid support stuff. So you want to make sure that their iodine levels are good, that their zinc levels are good, that they are, getting enough tyrosine, which is an amino acid, so they need to be having good quality protein. You also need to check your vitamin D levels with any autoimmune condition. A lot of people will have low vitamin D. So any blood test you have done, you always have to have your D levels checked. Ferritin is important for the activation for the thyroid hormone to actually improve your metabolism. So a lot of people are low in iron. So you want to make sure all your nutrient levels are supported because you want to make sure you're getting the most out of your thyroid hormone. But then you want to also look at how you can go about, and then herbally as well, there's things we can do to really look after that thyroid gland, reduce inflammation, and maybe turn down the effects of those antibodies. Because the antibodies are kind of like your thyroid's like the castle, trying to do its job and look after everything. And then the antibodies are like the marauding army that just keep coming wave after wave over the hills.
Gotcha.
So it's those guys you want to try and knock on the head or bring down. Mm-hmm. So when we're thinking about, so you're looking after the thyroid as much as you can, you're trying to support the thyroid hormone so you get the better result. But then you want to look at your antibodies. So the way we approach the antibodies is coming back always to look at the gut first. A lot of people with autoimmune also have a lot of gut issues as well. And it may present as something like irritable bowel syndrome. From a naturopathic point of view, we suspect that gut wall inflammation, there may be leaky gut or what's called, there's a new name for it that's just come out that sounds a lot flasher. Anyway, so you've got to go back and look at the gut first. And, and it sounds again, people must think, if you see a naturopath, they're all going to tell you you've got to get off gluten and dairy. But we do because, there's some research to suggest that gluten irritates everyone's gut and may be involved in autoimmune stuff or maybe one of the aggravators. So I always recommend people get off gluten and dairy if they're suspicious of having any autoimmune condition, and healing and repairing the gut. We've talked before about, good bacteria, getting onto a really clean diet as much as possible, cutting back on cereals and grains, carbohydrates. You want to eat to balance your blood sugars. So Hashimoto's, interestingly, is a good example of how we don't just try and treat the thyroid, which is the medical model of just fix the thyroid hormones, which for some people is invaluable initially, and sometimes you've got to do that. Some people can be so bad that you have to start with that. But at the same time, then you want to look at how you're going to go about improving their whole health. So nutrient-wise, herbal medicine makes a massive difference, and getting the diet right is a really big part of starting to repair the gut and start to turn down those antibody levels as well.
Just very quickly before we move on, Peter, from a dietary point of view, some things we should be throwing in there, a couple other than the things we should be taking out?
Well, the things to definitely avoid are your processed grains, your bread, quick oats, rice flour, gluten, soya products, generally. Artificial sweeteners, always fast foods, fry foods, genetically modified foods, alcohol, sugar, processed stuff. The things you want to try and have more of is things like your leafy green vegetables, Some starchy carbs, sweet potatoes, carrots, etc. Most vegetables and fruits, but even with fruit, you want to keep them a bit low. And even with veggies, some people do better avoiding the nightshades, which are your potatoes, tomatoes, capsicums, chilies, and eggplant, which is crazy because you think tomatoes are such good foods full of antioxidants, etc. Some people with thyroid don't do. It's worthwhile if you've got Hashimoto's actually doing maybe a food intolerance test, because particularly you want to avoid the foods that you're intolerant to. So normally I'd say eggs would be fine, but a lot of people are coming back intolerant to, unfortunately, eggs. So you'd want to keep them out of the diet as well. Or your good quality meats, grass-fed, pasture-fed, free-range chickens, wild-caught fish. So basically it's as healthy and whole food a diet as possible. Get copies of your blood test results. Ask your doctor for a copy and get someone to go through them with you to explain what it all means. So you get the gist yourself. Always get your vitamin D, iron studies tested as well. I'd also ask the GP to include zinc, because you want to know where these, and they won't always do selenium, etc. But if you see a naturopath, we can actually give you a referral to get those done, even through Lavity. And yeah, start with the diet. But probably one of the biggest drivers I find for Hashimoto's, and unfortunately even things like getting a better diet and doing all the lifestyle stuff can be stressful. But it's trying to reduce your stress as much as possible, really get a handle on those high levels of cortisol and busy pace of life, because making change can be stressful. So you want to try and limit stress as much as possible while you're doing all of this. But Hashimoto's is one of those conditions where, because it is quite complex, I think it is worthwhile going and seeing someone that can help you with it. From a naturopathic point of view, it's one of those conditions that can be a bit tricky just to deal with on your own.
I think that, again, we hear about it all the time, and it's a bit of a buzzword, but it really is. Everybody's stressed, and I think that's such a huge thing for quite a lot of ailments, isn't it? Yeah,
absolutely. And because we're talking about our next talk coming up is on thyroid, but it's actually fully booked out. But just for today, if anyone has a question around thyroid, they're more than welcome to ring our office. And David, one of our practitioners there, is our thyroid expert.
You've just dropped his name, so
yeah,
David.
Sorry, he's happy to take any calls. They're free. If people want to book in for a free 15-minute call, they can ring up the office today, and they'll actually get booked in to have a chat with David, and just to run any questions they have past him as well.
Okay, so great for those who are thinking underactive thyroid and thyroid conditions generally.
Absolutely.
David will get you on board with that. Peter, some other talks that are coming up very shortly. Limited places for your weight loss talk on February 27th, I think.
Yep. With our first weight loss talk this year was booked out. We had a lot of interest in that. And so we're putting a second one on. And this is an awesome talk for just information about how to eat. I go a lot into like carbs and, what's a healthy amount of carbs to have in a day. So even if you're not interested just in weight loss, if you want to know more about how we should all be eating, this is a great talk to come along to.
And one for those who've got kids is coming up in March.
Yeah. Look, kids is, again, it's an area that I'm really passionate about, because our kids' health is everything, really. And we've got our free talk for kids' health coming up on the 13th of March. A lot of people have been to a lot of our talks, but I always try and change the content every time. So even if you've been to one of our kids' talks before, it's worthwhile. And I think you always pick up different things as well.
It's like watching a movie.
Yeah,
I didn't see that the last time around.
Yeah.
Except the movie is Peter Mullen and some of his gang.
Yeah, I don't know whether I'd call it movie quality, but we do try to be entertaining.
Hang on a minute. I've seen some of the videos you and your team put on Facebook. Like, it's very, very much a matinee idol.
Thank you.
The $50 is coming. The $50 is coming.
Yeah.
Peter, some great information there. Thank you for bringing Hashimoto's disease, underactive thyroid, to us this week. Next week, when you join us on the radio, again, more weight loss.
Yep. Talking more about getting ready for that next talk on weight loss, but some really great new information about some really simple changes you can make that can make a massive difference long term.